Hello everyone. Before we begin for the discussion, there's a quick announcement. Today is Thursday, and as you know, every Thursday we post a question from the DNS on the eLearn platform. The question that you see on the screen has been posted today on the eLearn platform at 8 p.m. The question is based on the discussion that Ankit Kaul sir had on 9th of February 2023. If you feel like gathering the content before writing the answer, you can quickly refer to that DNS. I would highly encourage you to write the answer. It will immensely increase your learning experience from the DNS. This is an editorial article from today's newspaper, Message for Maturity. The article concerns the recent approach of Aam Aadmi Party to the Supreme Court against the governor not willing to call the budget session. The governor was in the process of seeking some legal advice concerning the earlier replies given by the chief minister to the governor, and he was wanting first that to be clarified before he can finally take a call on the budget session. But the thing is that the governor does not take a call on the budget session or any session of the legislature. And there have been many cases previously where governors have tried to stall the summon of the House. So let's see what is the constitutional position and Supreme Court judgment on the same. Prorogation and dissolution of the state legislature is dealt with Article 174. Article 174(1) says, the governor shall from time to time summon the House or each house of the legislature of the state to meet at such time and place as he thinks fit. But 6 months shall not intervene between its last sitting in one session and the date appointed for its first sitting in the next session. Meaning the gap between the two sessions should not be more than 6 months. But Article 174(1) has very important phrase in it, as he thinks fit. Now this phrase can be seen in the context of Article 163, which provides discretionary power to the governor. Article 163(1) says, there shall be a council of ministers with the chief minister at the head to aid and advise the governor in the exercise of its function, except in so far as he is by or under this constitution required to exercise his functions or any of them in his discretion. So the chief constitutional question at hand is whether this function of summoning the House falls under his discretion or not. Who will settle this? Supreme Court. The interpreter of the Constitution is Supreme Court of India. Supreme Court in Nabam Rabia and Bamang Felix versus Deputy Speaker Arunachal Pradesh Assembly case has come to a conclusion that the power to summon the House is not solely vested in the governor. And it is a settled question in law that governor cannot refuse the request of the cabinet to call for a sitting of the House for legislative purposes or for the chief minister to prove his majority. In fact, on numerous occasions, for example in Jharkhand in 2016, the court has clarified that whenever there is a question of majority of the ruling party, the floor test must be conducted at the earliest, and that has to be conducted in the House. So now when there is confusion regarding whether the government of Rajasthan has majority or not, floor test should be conducted at the earliest in the Legislative Assembly of Rajasthan. This judgment of Supreme Court was given with a lot of reasoning. In this case, Supreme Court referred to the Constituent Assembly debates and the draft Constitution of India. Supreme Court came to the conclusion that the framers of the Constitution expressly and consciously left out vesting power to summon or dissolve the House solely with the governor. Previously, in the draft Constitution of India, there was Article 153, which later translated to the present Article 174. The power of the governor under erstwhile Article 153 was substantially altered in the final form of the Constitution that we have today. Clause 3 of Article 153 provided that the functions of the governor with reference to the power to summon and dissolve the House shall be exercised by him in his discretion. So clearly, previously the draft Constitution gave discretion to the governor with regard to summoning the House. But when Article 153 was adopted to Article 174 in the final form, the clause 3 was not there. It was deliberately omitted. So after discussing the intention of the framers, the court concluded that the only legitimate and rightful inference that can be drawn in the final analysis is that the framers of the Constitution altered this original contemplation and consciously decided not to vest discretion with governor in the matters of summoning and dissolving the house. So the long and short of it is this. Supreme Court in the Nabam Felix judgment decided that governor can summon, prorogue and dissolve the house only on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers with the Chief Minister as the head, not at his own. This is the final thing that you have to know for both prelims and the mains exam. Let's take up another article from today's newspaper, combining social welfare and market capitals through social stock exchange. Social stock exchange has been in news since 2020 after COVID-19 pandemic broke out. But finally, the National Stock Exchange of India has received the final approval from SEBI to set up a social stock exchange. Social organizations, trusts and societies, they do very important work, but they are not profit oriented. So they cannot pay high returns on the investors. And hence, they are mostly dependent on donations and grants. But social stock exchange is aimed at developing a market mechanism for social sector enterprises to mobilize their own resources. The fundamental design of social stock exchanges would be the same as general stock exchanges. We will have various groups that seek to raise fund, and we will have various investors that will provide the capital. But the groups that will be participating in the investor and the motive of transaction will be different. The transactions in normal stock exchange are driven by profit motive. Various enterprise tries to raise capital to do economic activity with the sole motive of profit. And various investors provide capital with the agenda of getting the highest possible return. But in the social stock exchange, the participants will be non-profit organizations. Organizations which are registered as societies and trusts, and also Section 8 companies. Section 8 companies are those which are registered under Section 8 of Companies Act. They are also non-profit organizations, but they have higher financial reporting obligations. And all of them work mostly for impact investment. Impact investments are those investments which creates greater impact in the society, which creates some social goods, some common good, and the operation is for the welfare of all. They work in extremely important areas like health, education, water conservation, sanitation, afforestation, climate change, and these are not profit-oriented operations, so they can barely give higher return. So they cannot go through the normal route of issuing shares and bond. So a special mechanism has to be developed for social stock exchanges. For example, zero coupon, zero principal bonds. This instrument is in function in many countries, and this can be made operational for social stock exchange in India as well. Zero coupon, you understand, means zero interest rate. So the investor will not get any interest, and zero principal means the principal will also not be given back. Effectively, nothing will be given back. You give the money and you forget, but you will have the satisfaction that you have done an impact investment. So that is basically the return that you have. Then another instrument, social venture funds, can also be developed. Social venture funds operates like normal venture fund, but normal venture funds are low risk and reward driven. Social venture funds are not reward driven. Rather, they will provide investment for social ventures which are operating in high impact areas. Similarly, mutual fund units can also be used to raise money. These will function just like normal mutual fund, but the return on the investment of mutual fund will not go to the investor. Rather, that will go for impact investment by these societies and trusts listed on the social stock exchange. So you will get your principal money back, but you will not get the return on your investment. The question is, who will be interested in this kind of investment? The answer is pretty simple: the one who is not guided by high financial return on investment. For instance, companies with CSR obligation could be one candidate. Philanthropic organizations will be the most suitable candidate for this kind of investment. Money can come from individuals, from groups, from domestic market, from international market. It could come through FCRA contributions as well. So far, the idea was that participants to raise the capital through social stock exchange would be non-profit organizations, societies and trusts, and Section 8 companies, which are also non-profit organizations. But as we have just read the headline of the news, government is now considering that for-profit organization with some social impact can also be allowed to get listed on social stock exchange. So that's what is new. Social stock exchanges is not a new concept. They have been working very robustly in UK and in Canada, but the first social stock exchange was in Brazil. The Brazil Socio-Environmental Impact Exchange was the first social stock exchange in the world. There are around 3 million non-profit organizations registered in India, and they mostly depend on donations and grants from individuals, philanthropic organizations, national government, and from the international groups. But in the context of open economy, when government is getting out even from social services and the expenditure on social sector is very less, there is an urgent requirement to create market mechanism for resource mobilization for these social sector enterprises. And that is essential if we have to meet the SDG goals. It will be a daunting task to get our society back to normal post COVID-19 pandemic, and government's effort alone will not be sufficient for this. So the idea of social stock exchange has come just at the right time in India. There's a news article in today's newspaper concerning two Australian universities to establish campuses in the gift city of Gujarat. You must have been reading the news for quite some time concerning the expansion of higher education in India. When the visuals of Indian medical students coming back from Ukraine after the war start coming in, the Prime Minister Modi suggested a quick expansion of higher education in India by participation of various stakeholders, including the private sector. Even the new education policy calls for private participation in higher education. So let's discuss comprehensively this issue of private participation in higher education. There have been many reasons and reports and several cases that have been made out for private participation in higher education. First of all, with the commencement of the Constitution of India, there has been a clear policy direction for education. According to Article 45 of the Indian Constitution, there should be free and compulsory education for all children between the age of 6 and 14 years. So the focus shifted to elementary education. As a result, the involvement of the state in higher education has been reduced. A bigger justification for private participation rests heavily on the ground of efficiency to promote a more competitive economic environment. Operation of private sector enterprises are considered more efficient. It is believed that private ownership and control are more efficient in terms of resource allocation and work. You would be aware that many private and not-for-profit higher education institutions have been operating in countries like USA since many years, such as Stanford University, MIT. University of Phoenix in US is private and for-profit. Similarly, in UK, higher education system is characterized by many private providers which operate on a not-for-profit basis. Higher education in India is in financial stress. The government can no longer bear the financial burden of public enterprises. Currently, spending on education in India is not more than 3.5%. The center itself concedes that the minimum should be 6%. Expenditure on education overall is just the half of the bar set by the government itself. And expenditure in higher education is drastically below the standard. This compares unfavorably with the international level, especially when compared with countries such as South Africa, which invest 8% of its GNP on education. Therefore, there is a need to evolve policy through which private resources can be mobilized. Education is no more being treated as a social service, but increasingly and necessarily seen as an economic good. Investment in education is treated as a factor contributing to the development of human resources. So in this effort, private initiative can help since the private sector is the beneficiary of the knowledge industry. As we saw in the first point, that government has given much of its attention in the primary and secondary education. Presently, we have 100% enrollment in elementary education, and there is more than 50% enrollment in secondary education. Students coming from the primary and secondary education and students coming from the private schools, they are having demand for higher education and quality higher education. This rapid growth in quality school education is now creating demand for quality higher education, and that gap can be fulfilled by private participation. There is very little initiative for new courses and new technical skills in the public sector because of limitation of freedom. Private institutions are free to initiate modern and advanced courses in order to fulfill the demand for subjects. These courses, these technical skills are important for economic development of the nation. Information revolution recently has brought about huge development in areas like microchips, genetics, communications, robotics, lasers, satellites, computers, AI, and due to limited resources in public sector, they cannot meet the demand of the industry. Thus, private sector must take lead in training the manpower in technology and respond to the market demand. This necessarily requires freedom with the institutions, and that will come with privatization of universities. In the present time, there is a need for interaction between UGC, the other regulators, industry, R&D institutions, and funding agencies. And this could be achieved by a synergy process wherein there will be partners in various activities, complementing each other in achieving the goals, objectives, and vision of higher education. And private universities can act as the merging ground for this. In general, there is a push and pull factor, push away from the public sector and pull towards the private sector. Globalization is linked with market liberalization. And with market liberalization, quality in higher education is now also increasingly demanded. The government system is unable to cope with the increase in the enrollment. The pressure on the higher education system comes more because of this demand. In this condition, private participation is the only way education system can grow in response to this increased demand. Liberalization in education happened way back in 1991 when the economy was liberalized. And there has been already paradigm shift in the policy. India has moved from state-controlled education to open market economy education, or education for human development to education for human resource development, from national to global education, from subsidized education to education for a price. So now private universities, private participation in higher education in the form of private universities or deemed universities is only the natural progression of privatization in education that happened in 1991. You see, foreign direct investment is an important tool of globalization. When government lack funds, FDI is allowed into higher education. And the foreign universities are expected to bring the quality infrastructure in teaching, research, as well as physical infrastructure that will attract large scale foreign investment into India and also try to extend the reverse brain drain. If private participation is allowed, only then the branches of foreign universities or collaboration with foreign universities on larger scale will be possible. But there are many issues concerning participation of private sector in higher education in India. National Knowledge Commission was set up in 2005 to give recommendation on building a knowledge base in India. But National Knowledge Commission did not encourage for-profit educational institutions. Similarly, Yashpal Committee was set up in 2008 to recommend changes to the higher education sector. Yashpal Committee also suggested that private providers of higher education should not be driven by the sole motive of profit. Both National Knowledge Commission and Yashpal Committee recommended that it is essential to stimulate private investment in higher education to extend educational opportunities. But it would be a challenge to regulate the educational opportunity to be inclusive and for the welfare of all. Recently, TSR Subramaniam Committee report on new education policy admitted that uncontrolled privatization of higher education has resulted in the proliferation of private institutions for higher education. But there are few centers of excellence, and most of them can be described as degree shops. The private sector accounts for around 74% of enrollment in technical and professional courses, but it shares only around 39% of enrollment in general undergraduate and postgraduate courses. So the private sectors are skewed towards technical and professional courses, obviously because they are in demand and they are the courses that yield jobs. But for the overall higher education architecture, such skewed participation is not good. Then there's a big question of reservation. In the past, Supreme Court has stated that private unaided educational institutions have full autonomy in their administration. The court also stated that the principle of merit should not be sacrificed. That is, students should be admitted on the basis of their academic capability. So the management of private institutions can exercise its discretion for quota in admitting students, subjected to some conditions imposed by the management, for example, some minimum qualifying exams in the admission test. This means that the government cannot mandate its reservation policy on the private unaided educational institutions. But with 93rd Constitutional Amendment Act in 2005, there was an insertion of Clause 5 to Article 15. And Article 15.5 empowered the government to mandate reservations in private, aided or unaided educational institutions, except in minority educational institutions. This clause was challenged in 2008, and then the court upheld the constitutional validity of Article 15.5. The court said that if changes were brought towards the reservation policy for minority institutions, then the minority institutions will lose their minority character and would fail to be brought on the same platform as non-minorities. But the court left the question regarding applicability of reservation for private unaided institutions. So this constitutional and legal aspect must be clarified very well by the Supreme Court before the government can actually think of having a policy towards privatization of higher education universities. The Yashpal Committee report has come very heavily regarding the fee structure in private institutions. They are exorbitantly high. There's also a question of accreditation for the private institutions. It's a kind of certification, and it's very important to improve the quality of higher education institutions along with the quantitative expansion. It's a way of measuring quality of institutions. It takes into account certain factors like curriculum, teaching, learning, evaluation, infrastructure, student support, innovation involved in education institutions, faculties and technical support, and other such factors. In India, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, the autonomous body established in 1994, is the institution to accreditate private institutions. But the reports have been kept pending for private higher educations for accreditations, and hence the quality measurement of education in higher learning institutions in private sector have not been measured properly. This is the regulatory bottleneck that the privatization of higher education is facing, and with the expansion will face more. However, with proper monitoring by the state and control in the number of private institutions, with setting up certain regulatory parameters like adequate infrastructure, mandatory accreditation, regulation over the fee structure of private institutions, requirement of transparency in receipts and accountability of all expenditures, and having a global competitive policy not only for internal private sectors but for global private sectors. And with change in the business mindset, keeping in mind that education is not just a business but a noble service, private participation in higher education can be allowed. And this is not a new phenomena in India. BHU and AMU, they have come up with efforts and dedication and financial support of community since 1990s. But involving private sector does not mean that government can shrug its responsibility off. And on the whole, an improvement in the standard of education can be achieved through a balanced relationship between private and public sector. Although there are many drawbacks in privatization of higher education in India, but it is a sure way to improve the present educational system. There are some more important articles in today's newspaper, but since they have been already discussed in the previous DNS, so we shall not take up their discussion again, but we shall include them in the speed test. For instance, there is an article on the front page on G20. India asks G20 to extradite economic offenders fast. There's also an editorial article based on heat waves. Very recently, we had a discussion on causes of heat waves in the DNS. There is also an article in today's newspaper on National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. the friction it is having with the Environment Ministry concerning the new Forest Conservation Rules 2022. The new rules under Forest Conservation Act 1980 was released last year. And you know that habitat rights to the scheduled tribes are given under Forest Rights Act 2006. So the National Commission for the Scheduled Tribe had consternation that the new rules will impinge on the rights of scheduled tribe to secure habitat rights. But then the Environment Ministry said that the rules are given under Forest Conservation Act 1980 and not under Forest Right Act 2006. So the concern of the Commission was legally untenable. But whatsoever the case be, the rules be given under this legislation or that legislation, the concern of the Commission remains and it is legitimate. But from the exam perspective, you have to know what the rules are and what possible impacts it will have, and that has been covered already. So based on these articles and the articles that we have discussed previously, you have now a speed test in front of you. There are 12 statements and you have to identify whether they are true or false. You should take not more than 3 minutes. Clock yourself and take it in format of a test. Attempt all the questions and see how much did you score before listening to the discussion. The first statement here is, Fugitive Economic Offenders Act 2018 is applicable to individuals who have committed economic offences worth rupees 10 crore or more. We just saw in the headline, India asking G20 to extradite economic offenders fast. And the law that India has for this is this, Fugitive Economic Offenders Act 2018. But it is applicable to individuals who are declared as fugitive, and individuals are declared as fugitive if they had done economic offence of rupees 100 crore or more. That makes the statement false. The Act allows for the confiscation of assets even if the person has not been convicted of an offence. The statement is absolutely true, and I'll discuss this statement after checking out the next statement. Under the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act 2018, a person can be declared as fugitive economic offender by Finance Ministry. This statement is incorrect. A person is declared as fugitive economic offender by a special court that is formed under Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002. And the declaration is made after application is submitted to the court by the Director of Enforcement Directorate or any other officer not below the rank of Deputy Director. So it's the court that makes the declaration of fugitive economic offender. And once a person is declared as offender, then the confiscation of property can happen. And now if you read this statement, that confiscation of asset can happen even without the conviction. And that seemingly goes against the principle of presumption of innocence until proven guilty. But the thing is that Finance Ministry does not do this. The declaration of fugitive economic offender is not done by executive, it is done by judiciary. And hence the confiscation of asset is allowed even before conviction. Because you understand, conviction could be difficult because of hurdles in extradition. The Act allows the government to confiscate the assets of economic offenders and thereafter use the proceeds for compensating victims of economic offence. The government can confiscate the assets, but the Act is completely silent on compensating the victims of economic offence, and sometimes that is not easy to directly identify the victims in case of banking fraud. If the fraud happens to the tune of 100 crore or more, then the entire bank can collapse and that will have a ripple down effect. But who are the victims and to what degree they have been victimized, that's difficult to quantify. And hence the Act talks nothing about compensating any victim. The statement is false. Appeals against the order of this special court can only be done in Supreme Court. You understand, all these special courts, they are considered to be subordinate to high courts. And hence the appeal from all these special courts goes to the High Court, not to the Supreme Court. Heat waves can have positive impact on agriculture as warmer temperature can promote plant growth and increase crop yield. While it is true that warmer temperature can promote plant growth and increase crop yield, heat waves have negative impact on agriculture. Heat waves can cause water stress in the plant, leading to reduced growth and yield. because you understand the way heat waves are defined, that stems from much above the long-term average temperature, or in absolute sense, very high temperature above 45 degrees Celsius. And such high temperatures can damage the plant. It can reduce pollination. It can erode the effect of fertilization. It is more likely to increase pests and diseases. Moreover, prolonged period of extreme heat can also cause soil moisture to evaporate, leading to drought-like conditions. This will obviously reduce the productivity, can also lead to crop failure. So moderate temperature can be beneficial for agriculture. Heat waves are cause of concern. Generally, in La Nina year, there is above average monsoon rainfall. Since last 3 years, you must be aware we are having La Nina year. And since last 3 years, we have above average monsoon rainfall. This is a rough relation which generally holds true. So in a general sense, the statement is true. You understand that during La Nina years, the sea surface temperature in the Pacific Ocean, that reduces. And that reduced temperature can influence the atmospheric circulation pattern. The air currents in the atmosphere, they are coupled with the water currents. And the reduced surface temperature over the Pacific, that influences the atmospheric circulation pattern and the position and strength of jet streams. So ultimately, La Nina also ends up affecting Indian monsoon. La Nina condition typically leads to increase in the rainfall all over South Asia in general and also in India due to stronger than usual monsoon circulation. But however, the impact of La Nina on Indian monsoon is not very straightforward. There can be a significant regional variation. La Nina conditions can lead to above average rainfall in some parts of India, but they can also result in below average rainfall in other parts of India. But talking in a general sense, the statement is true. Retail investors can invest in securities offered by all social enterprises. Social enterprises would be involved in social stock exchange. But retail investors will not be investing in all social enterprises because you understand there are many social enterprises which are not for profit. So they don't earn profit, then how would they return to the investor? Retail investors could invest only in for-profit social enterprises and not in all social enterprises. For not-for-profit social enterprises, there would be institutional investors. They can participate. Religious organizations, trade associations, infrastructure, and housing companies, they can be identified as social enterprise. Well, various criteria has been laid down for social enterprises, and criteria also has been laid down for enterprises that will not be considered as social enterprise. To be considered as social enterprise, the enterprise must be serving to eradicate hunger, poverty, malnutrition, inequality. It should be involved in promoting education, employability, equality, empowerment of women and LGBTQIA+ communities. It can be working towards environmental sustainability, protection of national heritage, protection of art, bridging the digital divide, among other things. There's also a criteria that 67% of activities of an enterprise must be directed towards attaining the stated objective. But exclusion criteria also has been given. Corporate foundations, for-profit foundations, political or religious organizations, professional or trade associations, infrastructure and housing companies, they will not be identified as social enterprise except for affordable housing companies. But here the statement includes religious organizations, trade associations, infrastructure and housing companies. They all are excluded from the definition of social enterprise except for affordable housing companies. The National Commission for Scheduled Tribes has the power to inquire into complaints and take suo motu notice of matters relating to deprivation of scheduled tribes of their rights and safeguards. The statement is plain and straight. It is a true statement. National Commission of Scheduled Tribe, it has a power of a civil court and it can take suo motu notice. It can ask any person to be present and answer under oath. The Commission has the power to issue binding orders to the government and other authorities. And you would know that the Commission cannot have a power like this. They can only give recommendations. And beyond the traditional judiciary, special courts or commissions, they do not have binding powers. The Commission has the power of a civil court and can call for requisition of any public record or copy thereof from any court or office. The statement is factual and it is true. It sounds a little absolute kind of statement because of this any public record from any court or office, but the statement is true. It is a constitutional power of National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. As per the clause 8D of Article 333A, the National Commission for Scheduled Tribe has the power for requisitioning any public record or copy thereof from any court or office. And this is exactly what the news was about. Scheduled Tribes Panel requisitioned FRA action report from top court. The commission asked for the record from the Supreme Court. As you understand, the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes submits the report to the President, who causes the report to be laid down in the Parliament. So for preparing the report, it wanted to know as to what percentage of habitat rights claim have been granted so far, and more deeper insights that the authentic data can give. The reason why it went to the top court for the requisition of data is in 2019, Supreme Court asked all the state government to submit a report concerning the implementation of Forest Right Act. So it is that submission of the state government report that the commission went to the top court to seek. And hence on 20th Feb, Supreme Court ordered the registrar to give the reports to the commission because it is the constitutional power given to the commission. Thank you very much for being there. Tell me, how much did you score?